Hello everyone. Hello and welcome to another session of the exam readiness bootcamp, and that's put together by the AWS Cloud Security User Group West Africa. So with me here today again, we have Frank. Hello Frank, how you doing?
Hello, good evening. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, doing good, thanks, doing good. How's your week? How's your weekend? Sorry, how's your weekend been? Okay.
Well, it was a long weekend, but well,
And
we have to start
there's no
the
there's
week.
no there's no one there for you. You didn't
No,
go
no, no,
for.
no, no one there. I had a lot of work to do.
Really? Do you do anything to relax, or do you just walk and walk and walk and walk? Or do you relax a little bit sometimes?
Uh, I try. I try. I'm not a really outing person, so most of the times either I'm there working or I'm at home just relaxing if I don't have anything to
So you're like an introvert like me then. Also,
do.
oh
You can
no.
say that.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah. So for me, like the weekend was all right. I usually go. So the way that I sort of like structure things is weekend, like Saturdays is family day. So if you're trying to contact me like Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, I probably won't be picking your call. So because all through the week I'm busy working, really hard, and then Saturday it's completely family, and then Sunday, I go to church and all the other stuff, and then when I'm back from church again, it's back to work. But yeah, okay.
On
So
Sunday.
yeah, so yeah, of course, yeah, I do so on Sunday. So it's like because I do other things, right? So there are other things that I also get involved with, like the community stuff. Like yesterday night, we're having community meeting. I mean, you were part of the meeting. We had meeting at 4 o'clock yesterday
Yes,
together.
but
We
that
had
was in the
meeting
afternoon. One
in
in
the
the morning.
afternoon. Yeah, that was one. There are other communities. I had
Yeah.
another meeting like at almost 10. No, I had a meeting at 9 p.m. and then followed by the meeting at 9 p.m. I had another one at 10 p.m. So it's crazy, right? But that's how it goes sometimes. Okay, so we're back today to carry on from where we stopped the last time looking at AWS. And today we're going to start looking at domain number 4 of the AWS Security Specialty certification. And this domain is about identity and access. So it's about how do we secure identities for AWS and how do we secure access to AWS resources. And these are the different objectives that we need to get into. So we need to get into objectives of how to analyze access control configuration for AWS, giving recommendation on how to secure the root user. Do you remember what the root user is, Frank? So what is the root user on AWS? So when we say root user, do you remember what that means?
The root user.
Yeah.
I can't remember what that is right now.
So remember that when we sign up for an AWS account, it's going to create an account for us by default. So the first time you sign up for an AWS account, so the account that is going to create for us, we said that account has full permissions in um, in AWS. That account is called the root user. So that's sort of like how it
Okay.
works. So let me bring up like Paint very quickly. Paint, and the way that works is you sign up an account, you go to use your credit card, and you use your unique email address to create an AWS account. And when you create your account, the first identity that is going to create in your account is called the root user. Now, this identity has full permissions to your AWS account. So it has full permission. So essentially, it can do almost anything. So you want to be very careful of this account. And that is what that objective is talking about. We have to learn how to properly secure the root user. So let's go have a quick look at some recommendations. How do we secure the root user account? So there are some recommendations that we have here that we're going to look very quickly, and then we'll get into other aspects of AWS identity and access management. So let's see this. So let's go to bring up the slides, and I'm going to switch this. Okay, so when we are talking about securing our root user account, here are some good practices that we may want to follow, Frank. So number one practice is we may want to enable MFA. Not we may want to, we want to enable MFA for that root user account. So we want to make sure that before access is allowed to that account, you must provide a second factor of authentication. Another best practice is you want to set a very strong password for that root user account, and you want to lock it away. Why do we want to lock it away? Because we don't want it to be used for day-to-day activities, right? So that's why we want to lock it away, because it's that important, right? So if it gets lost, the ramifications, or if it gets stolen, the ramifications are great. So the other thing that we want to do is we want to monitor and alert for usage. You have an angry driver behind you. I can hear like the sound of the horn of the driver. So it's coming in from the microphone.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay.
So we want to monitor and we want to alert for usage. So we want to make sure that if anyone is using that root user account, we want to make sure that there's an alert that goes off. We want to make sure that we only use this account for tasks that can only be performed by the root user. So don't use this account for any other tasks. You know, it's sort of like, and I'm not sure if you remember, like, you know, I'm not sure if like maybe like your mom or your wife, I'm not sure if you're married. Are you married?
No, not yet.
No, not yet. Yeah, but maybe like your mom or your sister or someone that's married that you know, sometimes they'll have those special plates, right? That they'll keep. They don't use those special plates except for special occasion. Because if we use it anyhow and it gets broken, there's trouble. So that's essentially
Yes.
so it's like you only use the root user account for those special occasions. Whenever, whenever there's something that you cannot use, you cannot do except use the account. So what are some of the tasks that will require the root user account for? So for example, if you want to change the name of your AWS account, you need to do that with it. If you want to change the email address you used when you signed up for your AWS account, you need to use the root user account. If you want to change the password of the root user account, of course, you have to use the root user account. If you want to close your AWS account and say, I'm closing that account, I don't want to use this account at all, you need to use the root user account. If you want to sign up for AWS US Government Cloud, you have to use the root user account. So you can see that there's a lot of tasks that if you want to do them, you have to use the root user account. However, for other tasks, you don't want to use the root user account. You want to use something called an IAM account. So that's what we're going to get in today. So does that make a little bit of sense to you, Frank?
Yes.
In terms of the significance of this account, we want to really, really lock it down in terms of usage.
Yes.
So let's go to have a look at IAM very quickly. So let's lay some foundation for IAM. So let's see. So let's start with this. So the IAM is a concept that you've heard about before, Frank. The concept of IAM. Have you heard about it before?
In passing, but not. I never went back to really check what it was about.
Yeah, okay. So IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. And the whole concept about IAM is you have resources or services that you need to access. And you want to grant access to the resources in a secure way. That's the whole concept of Identity and Access Managers. You have resources that you want to access. You have principals, which are identities that need access to resources. And M is the bridge that is going to help us to securely grant access to resources for the identities that need those access. So that's sort of like how it works. So it's sort of like the policeman at the gate, or like the controller that's going to check everyone before they come in. So it's sort of like the one that's going to monitor and say, you want to get access to these resources, you have to come through me. I have to identify you first, and I have to make sure that you have the right credential to access that resource. So IAM is what is behind that. So let's have a look at some concepts around IAM. So IAM is the authentication and authorization service for AWS services and AWS resources. So IAM in AWS is a global service. What does that mean? What that means is in AWS, we have multiple regions. Do you remember how many regions we have in AWS, Frank?
Yes, we
So
had
like
about
last week, we talked
22.
about, awesome, awesome. That's amazing. So we do have about 22, we do have about 22 AWS regions. And within those regions, we can deploy services, right?
Yes.
However, IAM is not a regional service, right? It's not a regional service. IAM is a global service. So it doesn't live in a single region. Like other services, if you want to create like an EC2 instance, you create that in a region. But IAM, when you create, it's a global service, essentially. So let's go on and see some other stuff. So when we're talking about the AWS IAM service, we have different entities that we can create. The entities are the different objects that we can use to manage access to AWS. So what are the different entities that IAM supports? So IAM supports users. It supports user groups. User groups means we're grouping users together. So for example, I have 4 users here. I have Kwame, I have Emmy, I have Brenda, I have David. I can create a group called Cloud Architects, and I can create another group called Cloud Developers. I had Brenda and David into the group that's Cloud Architects. I had Kwame and Emmy into the group that is Cloud Developers. So IAM allows us to create groups of users. We can also create roles. We'll get into what roles are. So roles are identities that we can use to delegate access. That will make sense to you in a minute. And we have policies. Policies are the documents that we can use to assign permissions. And we'll get into that in a minute. So these are the 4 key entities that we can create in IAM. So there's a question in the chat window, so let's address the question very quickly. So Sakofi asked the question that says, what happens if you accidentally delete the root user account? So the answer to that, Sakofi, is that we cannot delete the root user account. Your AWS account itself is tied to the root user account, right? So the AWS is tied to the root user account. You can limit usage of the root user account, but you cannot delete it. It's tied to your AWS account. So hopefully that answers the question. Okay, so let's move on very quickly. One of the other concepts that we have to understand when working with IAM in AWS is the concept of ARN. ARN stands for Amazon Resource Name, right? Amazon Resource Name. So this is a way to uniquely identify AWS resources. So, and this is the format of AWS ARN. You have ARN at the beginning, then you have partition. Partition specifies the AWS cloud. So for example, it can be AWS or AWS China, for example, right? So that's the partition. The service specifies the AWS service. So it could be IAM, it could be S3, could be other services on AWS. The region specifies the region that the service lives in. If it's IAM, Is it going to have any region, Frank? What do you think? If it's AWS IAM,
No, it
is
will.
it going to have any region? It won't have any region because it's not a regional service, it's a global
No.
service, right? So it's not going to have a region. Awesome.
Yes.
And then you have the account, which will be the account ID, which is the identifier for your AWS account. And then you have the resource. Essentially, this is a way to uniquely identify your AWS resource out of all the AWS accounts that exist. For example, if I have a user called Brenda in my AWS IAM, this is what the ARN looks like. ARN AWS IAM resource. You can see that for the region is empty. So you can see that over there, that's empty. And then for the account ID, you have an account ID there. And then for the type of resource, it's a user resource. And then the name of that user resource, which is Brenda. So this uniquely identifies that user account globally across AWS. So the same thing, we have a group here called Cloud Architect. You can see what the ARN looks like. ARN AWS IAM account ID, the group, the Cloud Architect, name of the group. So this is something that we'll come back to later when we are looking at policies, because we have to be able to uniquely identify certain resources when we're doing policy. So it may not make sense now, it's going to make sense later. Let's go on very quickly. So let's start by looking at users. So when we're talking about AWS users, IAM users, so these are identities. I'm on the call, I'm live online. Yes, ma'am. Yes. So these are identities that we can use. These are identities that we can use for users and that we can use for applications. We can have up to 5,000 users in AWS IAM. So we can have up to 5,000 users. So that doesn't sound like a lot if you're working with like a massive organization. So if you're working with a massive organization, there are different approaches that you can take. So where you have your identity outside AWS and you do something called identity federation. We'll talk about that later. But just know that in terms of the maximum number of users that we can have up to 5,000 users. When we create a user in AWS IAM, the user has no permissions by default. And when we create a user in AWS IAM, we have to specify the type of credential that we want to create for the user. So for example, I can create a user with a username and password. I can create a user with an access key and secret key. The main difference between these two is this. If you want a user to be able to log in using the AWS console, then you have to create them with a username and password. If you want a user to be able to log in to AWS using API or using command line interface, then you have to create them with the access key and the secret key. So that's how it works. So this is sort of like how that works. Like I have AWS IAM, I create a user called David. If the user needs access to AWS console, I create the user with a username and password. If the user needs access to AWS API or AWS CLI, I create them with an access key and secret key, and they can use that to access the console. They can use that to access the CLI or the API. Let's have a look at how that works in action very quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to my AWS account, and I'm going to authenticate and show this to you. So let me authenticate to my AWS account, put in my AWS password, and I'm going to do multi-factor authentication. So let's get my multi-factor MFA provider here very quickly. So this is 329976. Let's submit that. Okay, so here I'll go to AWS IAM. And over in AWS IAM, I'll go create a user account. So I'll close this. I'll go to create under users, and I'll go to create a new user. So I'll create a user called Kwame. So let's go ahead and do that. So user will be Kwame. Do you know Kwame Nkrumah, Mr. Frank? Do you know, have you heard the name before?
Yes, I think there's a university named that.
Sorry?
I think there's a university in Ghana that has that name.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, definitely. It's a great man. So Kwame is the username that I'm going to use. So, and you can see the credential type option that I was talking to you about. So if I want the user to access AWS console, I can give the user a password. One user to access AWS, I can give the user an access key. I can specify the credential type. So what I can do is I can go create a custom password for this user. Let me create one. So custom password for the user, I'm not going to require a password set. I'll go to next. And am I going to add the user to a group? We'll talk about groups later. But for now, I'm just going to create the user without assigning any permissions to the user. And I'm going to create the user. So now I have a user account that's created. The user has no permission to anything, but the user has an access key for API, and they also have a password that they can use to log into AWS. So let me go ahead and test this out. So to sign into AWS as the user, I'll copy that, and I'll bring up this up.
Okay. Quick question.
It's
Can
gonna,
the access
yes,
key be changed?
yes, it can be changed, it can be removed, it can be rotated. So if I go over here, so this is the current ACK key, right? So by the way,
Yes.
you have to make a note of it, otherwise you won't be able to see it anymore. So once
Okay.
you close this, you won't be able to see it anymore. However, what you can do is if you've forgotten the secret key and you want to go back to that, what you can do is you can just go make the current one inactive and create a new one. So if I go to my user Kwame, and if I go to that user account, so the AWS resource is a bit slow today. So by anyway, I go ahead and I click on that. And if I go under security credential, you can see the access key there. I can make this one inactive, right? And I can just go create another one, right? So if I wanted to, I could just go create another one, but I can only have two at a time. So you can have a maximum of two access keys at a time. Okay. So let's go log in as Kwame and see if we're good. So username Kwame, password, I'll put in Kwame's password and sign in. And you can see, here we go. Now I'm signed in as Kwame into this, right? But Kwame has no permission for anything. So I'll grant permissions, which will come to that. So let's move on very quickly. So that is working with users in AWS IAM. So those are the different credentials, and that's how that works. Then we have groups. When we talk about groups in AWS IAM, groups are a collection of users. And what groups does is it makes it easy for us to manage permissions. So for example, instead of assigning individual permissions to 10 users, what I can do is I can put those 10 users into a group, and I can assign permission to that group. So I only need to assign my permission once instead of assigning it 10 times. So it makes it easier for me to manage permissions. So for example, I have my users, David, Brenda, Emmy, and Kwame. I can create a group called Cloud Architect, another group called Cloud Developer. I can add Brenda and David into that group and Kwame and Emmy into the other group. And then we'll talk about policies later. I can assign permissions to that group. Instead of assigning the permission directly to individual users, I assign permission directly to a group. So one of the things to keep in mind is that nested group membership is not supported. Do you know what nested group membership means?
No.
So nested group membership is when you have a group within another group. So I have a group called Cloud Architect, and then within my group called Cloud Architect, I create a group called Cloud Engineer, and I want to add the group called Cloud Engineer as a member of this group. So that is called nested group membership. So AWS IAM does not support nested group membership. You can only add users into a group. You cannot add group into another group. Make sense?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So, and also, a user can be a member of a maximum of 10 IAM groups. A user can be a member of 10 IAM groups. So nothing more than 10. So that's the maximum. So let's go have a look at working with group very quickly. So if I go back to the AWS console, let's go to a look at that. So if you go, and instead of going to users, if I go to user groups, and under user groups, I have two groups, Cloud Architect and Cloud Developer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another group called Cloud Engineers. So I'm going to create another group. I'm going to call it Cloud Engineers. And I can add my users to the group. So for example, I can add Kwame into that group. And I can go ahead and I can assign permission to the group. So we assign permission using policies. We'll talk about policies in a minute. But at the moment, I want to assign, I'll just go to the group with Kwame as a member. Does that make sense in terms of working with groups?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So let's move on to the next one, the other entity roles. So roles, what does role stand for? So role is an identity that can be assumed by users, applications, or services. What does that mean? Identity that can be assumed by users, application, and services. It means I have an identity and a user can essentially put on the clothes of that identity and act as if they are that identity. Or maybe an application can go ahead and put on the cloth of that identity and act as if they are that identity. That's what role allows us to do. So we create a role identity, and then we can allow applications and services to assume that. Let's go have a look at some more information about AWS roles. So I have another slide here that goes into a lot more details on AWS roles. So let's see what they're about. So for example, in this scenario, Frank, I have a role that I've created in AWS IAM, and I've attached a policy which gives permissions to certain AWS resources. I've assigned that policy to that IAM role. And what I can then do is I can then use that role for delegating access. So for example, maybe there's a user in another AWS account that I want them to be able to access resources in my AWS account. I can use a role to give them access. So Frank has his own AWS account here. So we'll say Frank's AWS account. What I can do is I can allow Frank's AWS account to assume that role, and then Frank, a user in Frank's AWS account, can use that role to gain permission to my AWS services. So that's one of the use cases for roles. Another use case is maybe I have a mobile application that I've developed. So I have a mobile application, and maybe the mobile application needs access to AWS services. I can create a user identity for that application, and I can add code the username and password into that application. Is that a good idea to do that, Frank? Excuse
I
me.
think. Bless you.
Is it a good idea? So I'm going to create a username and password for my mobile application, and then I'm going to add code the username and password into my mobile application. Is that a good idea to do? You can
That's
see me.
add it's a bit
You can
confusing.
see me
You
shaking
add
my head. Go ahead.
okay. You said
Go ahead.
uh,
What?
I don't know. I don't know if it's a good idea.
So I'll tell you it's not a good idea. So it's like saying, Frank, I'm going to have my username and password. I'm going to write
Okay.
it on a sticky note and I'm going to put it on my monitor. Is that a good idea?
Oh no. No.
So that's the
Okay,
equivalent
so
of doing that.
okay, it means that if you have the mobile app and you have that username and password and you log into this role,
Yep.
the username and password becomes visible.
So anyone that knows a little bit of programming can try to reverse engineer my mobile application and then they get access to the username and the password.
Wow. Okay.
So you don't want to ever add code secrets into your application. Username or password or secrets, you don't want to ever add code that into your applications, except in like maybe some scenarios where they are less sensitive. So you don't want to do
Okay.
that. So this is not a good idea. So what other option do we have that we can use? The other option is we can use roles. We can create a role, have the mobile application assume the role, and then the mobile application can use that role to gain access to the AWS resources. One of the things to also note about AWS IAM role is that it does not have long-term credentials. So it doesn't have username and password. It doesn't have secret keys and access keys. It doesn't do all of that stuff. It works with temporary access token. It works with temporary security credential granted through a security token service. So that's how AWS IAM works. And let's see some information about this. So what entities can we use, can we grant access to using AWS IAM role? We can grant access to AWS services, to AWS user accounts in another AWS account, to web identities, and to federated identities, which we're going to cover later in this series. Those are the different entities that we can grant permissions to using roles in AWS. So here is a sample scenario of roles in action, Frank. So let's have a look at this scenario. So in this scenario, I have an EC2 instance on AWS. You know what an EC2 instance is?
No, I don't.
Yeah, so an EC2 instance is a virtual machine. You know what a virtual machine is?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So it's so in AWS likes using fancy names. So they don't like using direct names. So instead of saying
Okay.
virtual machines, they say EC2 instance. EC2, by
Okay.
the way, the full meaning is elastic um, compute. 1 minute. So let me go for this one. So EC2. Um, Let me bring this up very quickly. So yeah, elastic compute, and that's why they call it EC2. So you have the E and you have the two C's. So C2. The mate is very easy, right? So you have elastic
Yeah.
compute cloud and you have EC2. So but at the end of the day, it's just a virtual machine, right? So it's same thing. You know, AWS likes fancy names. So for example, they have S3. S3 is a service that you can use for storing data. S3 is for simple storage service and call it S times 3, S3. Instead of just saying storage service, they call it S3. So, but AWS like using fancy names like that. You have DynamoDB and all of that stuff. At the end of the day, They're just simple cloud services that you can use. No, 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 I'm live. I'm live. No, 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 not now, please. Thank you. No, no, not now, but Brenda, please. Oh my God. Apologies.
Okay.
Okay. So back to what we're talking about. So let's say I have an example of something like this. Um, let's go to this. So I have an example of an EC2 instance that's running an application. And what I want to do is the application that's running in the EC2 instance needs access to an S3 bucket. So it wants to be able to read data from S3 and it needs to be able to write data to S3. So how do I grant access to the S3 bucket for an EC2 instance using AWS IAM role? Let's see how that's going to work. So, and let me show you an example of this in action. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll show you my S3 bucket. And the next thing that I'll do is I would create an EC2 instance in AWS. So let's go to do that very quickly. So earlier today, Frank, what I did earlier today was um, I published a Medium write-up. So the Medium write-up talks about, so it's in the AWS security user group for West Africa. So, and what I did was I published a write-up on automating EC2 creation using AWS CLI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this to automate the creation of an EC2 instance on AWS. So let me do that very quickly. So let me see if my script works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the AWS Cloud Shell. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go to do. And I'm going to bring up the AWS Shell very quickly. So it's a bit slow. Not sure why it's a bit slow today. Oh, there's a question in the chat window. So let me address the question. So the question says, if a user is a member of both Group A and Group B, and Group A have S3 permission, and if a user is a member of both Group A and Group B, and Group A have S3 permission, and Group B have denied S3 permission, will the user be allowed to access S3? The short answer to that, Sakofi, is no. Is the short answer to that. We'll get into the reasons for that later. So deny overrides allow. So whenever there's a deny, it's going to override any allow permission. So that's sort of like the way that it works. So because there is a deny permission, it's going to override whatever allow permission that exists. Okay, so let's go to bring up Cloud Shell and let's use the script to spin up an EC2 instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this script. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to take that to AWS Cloud Shell in not Virginia, not Oregon. I'm going to an EC2 instance using the script. So it's taking a while to bring up the environment. So we're going to see what that's going to look like. So Frank, do you watch any sports at all?
I don't sound boring, but football sometimes when I
Sometimes.
can.
So,
Sometimes.
but
I think
you're
I
not
prefer.
a
I'm quite. The funny thing is, I'm quite. Well, it's a bit reduced now, but I used to be quite competitive and athletic.
yeah
I like tennis. I like relay, like 4x4.
yeah
So anything that makes me active, more like I prefer individual sports.
yeah.
Yes. So,
I
but
see.
football is like the general sport for everybody. And when you say you don't like football, people are confused, especially in Nigeria. And then they say, "So if you don't like football, what do you like?" So, I like tennis. I like I like running. So the two sports
Yeah,
I
I'm not
do.
that follows. I'm not someone that follows football a lot also. So you're not the so you're not the only one. I
Okay,
don't follow
that's
football at
perfect.
all also.
Um, the main reason why I do football is because of my siblings, and then maybe my cousins or my friends, because when they are
Okay.
talking about it, I'm usually quiet, but at least just chipping some word in.
Oh, by the way, I think that allowing my script is not allowing me to copy and paste directly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to another version of that same script here to create my instantly. So go ahead and do that. So I have another version of the script I have locally on my PC. I'm going to use that to create. So by the way, I have a very funny story on tennis. Cause
Okay.
why is this failing? So myself and my wife, so um we went to like a gym that had like a tennis. And what we were going to do is we were going to go play tennis. And we've never played tennis before. We're not fans of tennis or anything, but we just thought, oh, it's going to be fun. We thought it was easy, right? Because you see people playing it on the TV. You know, they just go boom and boom and boom,
Okay.
and then and then we got to the gym, and then my wife picked up the ball, and she wasn't able to hit it because because
Because
and after
the
like a
first
few
thing you
minutes, yeah, you were going to say something.
no,
Sorry.
I was saying the very one of the first things you have to learn is the serve. So I know that she
Yeah,
she would have not gotten any correct serve, or well, would have been hard.
it's not easy. It just looks easy on what's it called on screen, but it's not easy at all. So
I think most.
after like about 2 or 3 minutes of myself and my wife, um, struggling through with that, I think we had like a few people gathering around us looking to see what. So we were like, okay, I think we should go play badminton now. We were like,
Oh
all the
God.
other tennis players were like, what are those people doing over there? We're like, yeah, let's go ahead and play badminton. I don't think tennis is for us.
Hmm.
So we just quietly moved away, and we just quietly looked for where we could get badminton, and then we just went to play that.
Badminton is a bit easier, but it still has some practicing to do.
Yeah.
So
I mean, we love badminton. I mean, we got along very, very well with badminton. So
okay.
I mean, yeah. So because it's like, we just try to play like these tricky games where the ones that you're going to serve it very, 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 very low, so that it's going to be very tough for the other person to
Yeah.
get to. So that's what we do for each other. Oh, actually, I need to go to. So by the way, what I'm doing is I'm using the oh, sorry. So I'm using the script that I have over here. I'm using that to create um, the AWS EC2 instance. So I'm guessing there's almost there. So, and again, I have the script out on Medium in case anyone is interested in seeing the script. I've written out the process on the community publication on Medium to show how that works. So, so what I'm doing here is I'm just creating an EC2 instance. So let's get this created very quickly. So I'm going to create my EC2 instance shortly. Okay. Um, so let me just check. The root doesn't like the root ID, root table ID. So let me just check that I have my root table created. So echo root table ID. Okay, that's good. So let me try that again. Hopefully that works this time. So let's do echo subnet one. That's good. Okay, let's try that again. Oh, okay. That's fine. So let's move on. Let's create the EC2 instance. So essentially what I want to do is what I want to show you. Um, Let me go ahead and do this again. And let's do lists. Okay, I've got this already. So let's go ahead and create my EC2 instance. Okay, so let me go ahead and connect to my EC2 instance 100.25.10.179. So hopefully that works. But it's still deploying, so I can see that it's still in the pending state. So it may not be working at the moment. Okay, so here's what I want to do. So so back to the slides to quickly show you what I have S3. I want my application that's running on EC2 to be able to access this, and I don't want to add code any secrets. I don't want username and password. So I have my EC2 instance. I have my S3 bucket. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a row in AWS IAM. And when I create the row, there are two types of policies that I can attach to the row. I can attach a trust policy. The trust policy defines who can assume the role, and I can assign a permission policy which defines the access that the role has. So for example, I can give this role permission to S3, and I can give the trust policy EC2 instance, for example. So the permission policy controls permission to resources. The trust policy controls who can assume the role. So that's sort of like how that works. So let me go ahead and show that to you very quickly in the interest of time. So let me head back to my AWS environment. So let's try that again. So let's go to row, and let's go to IAM. So if I go to IAM row, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new row. And you can see the different services that I can grant access to using row. I can grant access to an AWS service. I can grant access to an AWS user in another AWS account. I can grant access to a federated identity, web identity. So I'll just go ahead and specify I want to grant access to an AWS service. And I'll go ahead and I'll specify my EC2 and say I want to grant access to EC2 and go to next. And it says, what permission do you want to grant the row? I want to grant the row S3 permissions. I want to grant it full access to S3. So I'll go ahead and specify that permission or that policy. And I'll go ahead and go to next. And you can see what the trusted policy looks like. So this is saying the EC2 service can use the row that I'm creating to access S3. So that is what that is doing. So I'll call this row EC2 to S3 access. And if I scroll down, and I'll go ahead and I'll create the row. So that's going to create my row for me. So create the row. Oh, okay, it already exists. So I already have a row called EC2 to S3 access. I'll call this one at the end. to make it a bit different, and I'll click on create role. So now I have my role that's now ready to use. So let's go back to the slides and let's see. So I have my role that grants trust policy to EC2 and permission policy to S3. So, and this is an example of what that looks like. So to tie all of this together, what I can do is I can use something called instance profile in EC2, and I can use it to get credential from AWS STS. So STS stands for Security Token Service. So that is the service that we can use to obtain credential for an AWS IAM role. So the flow is that my application can request for a token from AWS STS, and it's going to make a call using the STS assume role permission for that role. And STS is going to say, yes, you're allowed to assume that role. Therefore, I'm going to return a credential to you that you can use. My application can then use that credential to go access the S3 bucket. The credential is going to contain the following information. It's going to contain an access key ID, a secret access key, a session token, and the expiration time. So this is a token that's going to expire after a while. So it's not a token that's like permanent. So that's how that works. So it's going to grant that token, and then it's going to use that token to go access the S3 bucket. So let's tie all of this together and see how that works. So let me go to my EC2 instance. Let me go fix a few things. I have my instance, but I think my root table is not properly working, so I need to go fix that. So let's go very quickly to view my instance. So that's the instance that's running, and if I go to the instance, if I go to under security, let me make sure that I can access that over port 22. That's good. So let's go over to VPC. So what I'm doing here is I want to make sure that I can connect to my EC2 instance. So if I go over to my VPC, and that's a bit dragging today. Oh, okay, I can see. Oh, it's using a different name. That's why that didn't work. So I can see the reason why that didn't work. So I need to go fix some of the scripts. So that's not the name you should be using. But anyways, I have two VPCs. So let's go on the subnets. So I have a subnet called app subnet. And if I select the app subnet, does it have a root table associated with it? So it has a root table that's going to that gateway. So that looks good to me. And yeah, so that looks good to me. So it's going to that gateway for every other traffic. And I have the gateway there that's attached to the VPC. Okay, so everything looks like it should be good. Oh, there we go. That's awesome. So connect to it. Now I'm connected to my AWS EC2 instance. So there's one thing that I need to do to tie all of that together to make all of that work. So if I go over to EC2 over there, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under security, and I'm going to make sure that my EC2 instance can use the role that I created. So, and this will lead us to the end of the session today. So if I go over to that, and if I select my EC2 instance, and if I go to under security, I can see that there's no role that's associated with this EC2 instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under actions, under security. I'm going to go to modify IAM role, and I'm going to link it up with the role that I created earlier. So EC2 to S3 access role that I created earlier. So I believe it's this one. And I'm going to update that. So now, quick question to you, Frank. Did you see add code any username and password? Did I add code any username and password anywhere?
No, you didn't.
No, so I didn't add code any username and password anywhere. But let us go to see if my application or my EC2 instance over here can access the bucket using this role without coding any credentials. So let's go to have a look at that. So I'm currently connected to that EC2 instance here. So this is the EC2 instance. Let's clear the screen. And if I do AWS S3 list, and let's run that, and look at that. I didn't add code any credential. I didn't log into anything, but it's giving me a list of all the S3 buckets in my account. And if I want to verify, are those the S3 buckets in my account? If I go to my account and I go to S3, and I go to type that in there, so I go to under S3, you'll see that it's listed, and it's doing that by assuming the role. So it's using the role to obtain a temporary credential, and then it's using that temporary credential to access the S3 bucket. So you can see I have 4 buckets, and if I go to my EC2 instance, it can see those 4 buckets right there. So you have DO EC2 app buckets, you have DO EC2 app buckets there. So it's able to see that, and the process it went through is the process that you have on the screen. So that is how roles work. Okay, so I think that we ran out of time already, so we'll have to stop here for today. So however, we've gone through like different AWS entities like users and groups and roles, and we've seen demonstrations on how we can work with them. So tomorrow we'll talk about more entities like policies and some other entities. So let's see if there's some questions in the chat window. So Sakofi says, in regards to role permissions, is it possible to be more granular? Example, instead of full access to S3, can you drill down to access a specific bucket? The answer to that is yes. And that is where we're going to pick this up from tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to start talking about policy. And policies are what we use to grant permission. So tomorrow we're going to look at the different types of policies that exist. We have identity-based policies, resource-based policies, and we have built-in policies where we can also create custom policies. So we'll look at those tomorrow. So the answer to that question is yes, we can do that. Okay, any question for me today, Frank? Any question at all?
No.
Okay, so if there are no questions, thanks very much everyone for joining us today. So we're going to see you again tomorrow in a study session on AWS Security Specialty Exam Readiness Preparation. Have a lovely evening, afternoon. See you next time. Bye for now.
Bye.